Green Day made headlines last week on New Year's Eve when they changed the lyrics of their song American Idiot during a live TV performance. Instead of saying, "I'm not a part of the redneck agenda," they said, "I'm not a part of the MAGA agenda," which for those who aren't into American politics is a shot at Donald Trump and his little wing of the Republican Party. This is not a politics video. So what I'm really trying to talk about here is the response to what they did. Conservatives lamented Green Day on the internet for being woke or liberal, and even Elon Musk chimed in, tweeting that Green Day goes from raging against the machine to milk-toastedly raging for it, with some boomer emojis unironically tacked on. But I gotta ask, have these people ever listened to Green Day? Their biggest album is American Idiot, and who exactly did these people think the Idiot was when it came out in 2004? It was a protest album, giving the finger to George W. Bush and saying no to the Iraq War. The lead singer, Billy Joe Armstrong, has also taken shots at Trump before. This isn't new for them. Green Day has been pretty consistent in their political beliefs. And it's not surprising, given that in the 1990s, they were the face of their wave of punk rock. Genre is a very complex thing, but a lot of people who organize genres put punk under the branch of alternative rock, although some people would probably disagree with that. I think of it that way because when I had an iPod as a kid, I had a lot of punk rock in my library because my dad loves punk rock, and we shared in iTunes, and on iTunes it would come up as alternative/punk. So to me, those two have always been kind of a part of the same world, even if that's not really the truth. What exactly is alternative music? Thank you for 1,000 subscribers, by the way. That's crazy. I really appreciate you guys. If you're not subscribed, please throw me one. No pressure though. According to Merriam-Webster, aka the dictionary, so you know it's gotta be true, right? Alternative music is music that's produced by performers who are outside of the mainstream. But can we really say that Green Day is outside of the musical mainstream when they're performing at Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve with Ryan Seacrest? That is quite literally one of the most mainstream things you could do. But at the same time, it's not like Green Day is making like Sam Smith, sugary pop music. Their music has definitely evolved since they came out in the early 90s, but it hasn't changed that drastically since American Idiot almost 2 decades ago. Actually, 2 decades ago now. That's crazy. It's on the poppier side of punk and alternative rock. Trying to grapple with what the word alternative means is going to be a big part of this video. It doesn't even just refer to a kind of rock music anymore. All the genres have their own kind of alternative. It's a clothing style, it's a fashion, it's a way of life to some. But what does it all mean? What drives people to these alternative things? And are things that are once alternative always alternative? Let's try to unpack it. But to truly understand, we're gonna have to start from the beginning. Okay, that's a little too far back, hold on. We can actually start in like the 80s. Before alternative rock, there was something called college rock. The reason it was called that is pretty obvious. The listener base of these bands that they put in that category were mostly made up of younger people, and colleges are mostly made up of younger people, and colleges have their own radio stations, and these radio stations were allowed to play whatever they want. So the young people who were sick of hearing whatever was on the top 40 radio or even the mainstream rock radio were finding other bands and playing them when they had the chance to play their own stuff. Because people in the 1980s were starting to get tired of the hair metal bands and the old school way of rock music, the music that you and I might think of as classic rock. They were looking for something new, and that led them to bands like Camper Van Beethoven. The internet says that they were one of the first bands to ever be called alternative by Spin magazine in 1987. Their song Where the Hell is Bill called out the alternative/independent scene and dryly tore it apart, wrote the magazine. I wasn't familiar with Camper Van Beethoven, so I checked out the lyrics of the song, which are all about making fun of the stereotypical wave rider music fan. While I wasn't personally alive to witness the type of guy that they're trying to parody, with a mohawk and a British flag, I can picture him, and I can hear the opium version in my head for today. Where the hell is Bill? Maybe he went to get some Rick Owens. Maybe he went to get a vampire cape and fangs. By the late 1980s, Billboard had added alternative as a category on their charts. By the early 1990s, the word was spreading like wildfire with fans, and they would refer to the scene that had these new rock and roll acts as the alternative scene. And of course, once you start putting musicians in a box, they're gonna start pushing back against it. We see this today with people who get called rappers, but nobody likes getting put in a box when it comes to their art. So of course, there was gonna be a little bit of tussling. The lead singer of Camper Van Beethoven, David Lowry, went on to start another band called Cracker, and they went on to be much more successful than his first band. I actually had this Cracker album, Kerosene Hat, on my iPod growing up, and I didn't really have any context for like who they were or what they meant, but I used to listen to this sometimes, so it's kind of funny seeing it come up in my research. And in an interview with Rolling Stone, he was wrestling with being called alternative. I remember first seeing that word applied to us, with us being Camper Van Beethoven, his first band. The nearest I could figure is that we seemed like a punk band, but we were playing pop music. So they came up with this word alternative for those of us who do that. And he went on in that interview to say something which kind of goes along with the theme of my video. He said, Isn't it funny how normal alternative bands are? You see, just like today, even in 1994, something good could only be alternative for so long, before it catches so much steam that the whole world falls in love with it. People start copying it, and then it looks like the most mainstream thing in the world. In the 1990s, bands came seemingly out of nowhere with grunge, shoegaze, indie, pop punk, Britpop. But after a while, these genres aren't fresh and new and alternative anymore. They were what everybody in the crowd wanted to hear and expected to hear. So eventually the Outcast kids move on and start making like rap rock like Limp Bizkit. And this is not gonna be like just like a history of rock music video, but you can see how what's alternative changes year by year based on what people are expecting. So looking at today, there's a few uses of the adjective alternative, and I want to dive into all of them. We should start with alternative R&B because, to be honest, that's kind of my bread and butter. I was in high school for the Frank Ocean and Weeknd mixtape era, so that's really shaped my music taste a lot. Journalists and music people at the time were very quick to classify them as alternative R&B because, a lot like Camper Van Beethoven, nobody had a word for what they were doing. They didn't sound particularly similar to each other, but they were definitely both rooted in traditional R&B music. You see, R&B music in the early 2010s was going through a little bit of an identity crisis. Usher, who would be on a lot of people's Mount Rushmores as one of the greatest R&B acts of all time, and has one of the greatest and most popular R&B albums of all time with Confessions, was making robot music with will.i.am. Oh my gosh. I can't wait to hear that one at the Super Bowl in less than a month. He wasn't alone in this either, and with mainstream R&B artists flirting with EDM so much, which honestly didn't satisfy either fan base, the R&B base or the EDM base, it only really appealed to like wedding and bar mitzvah DJs. Artists like Frank and The Weeknd used the internet to get their fan base and flip the genre on its head. Miguel was right there too. I feel like he doesn't get talked about as much, but his album Kaleidoscope Dream back in 2012, one of my personal favorites. A couple years later, SZA came along, and that added a much needed female perspective to the genre. But today in 2023, 2024, I'm still getting used to it. Can you really call those sounds of R&B alternative? SZA, Frank, and The Weeknd are three of the biggest artists on earth. Frank just did Coachella, SZA topped the charts all year, and The Weeknd just did the Super Bowl. And perhaps more importantly for this video, their musical DNA is all over the genre, and beyond the genre of R&B at this point. Everyone spent the 2010s trying to do that dark, sexy kind of R&B that The Weeknd does, or at least that he did around the Trilogy era. I had this moment where I was talking about music on the internet, and somebody in their teens were saying that they never really got the hype around The Weeknd and why he was so special. And at first that was crazy to me, but then I realized like if you weren't there listening to him in like 2011, 2012, even though he did it better than most of the copycats who came after him, like so many people have tried to sound like that it doesn't sound quite as special as it did when you were there. You really had to be there to see how alternative it was. And the same goes for Frank and SZA too. I mean, you can see their lineage all over the new R&B artists. And that's not a bad thing, of course, but it's just funny to call it alternative when it's really pretty mainstream in that sense now, right? We can look at the fashion style alt too, right? First of all, nobody has the same definition for what that means. It can be hard to put in words what alt means exactly, but when it comes to clothing and style, when you see it, you know it. And there are a few different pockets of it. So let's go on TikTok and type in alt fashion and see what comes up. All right, so this person has a really colorful and pastel approach to what alt is, and that's cool. And these two creators are mostly wearing black, but doing it in very different ways. One of them has a punk thing going on, the other one's a little more cutesy. But all of this could be alt. And to be clear, all of them are putting that shit on. But the thing with clothes like this is that the more people wear it, the more likely it's gonna be in Urban Outfitters or Zoomies or PacSun in like a year, right? Things can only stay like alternative for so long. Like being a teen in the early 2010s, Odd Future merch, I had to like borrow my mom's credit card to buy it on their website. In a couple years, they were selling it at Zoomies. That's just the way things go. Alternative hip hop, speaking of Odd Future, as a concept, I'm not really sure how to wrap my head around it. I think it still does kind of fit the 90s definition of alternative in that it really becomes like a grab bag for all the different rap styles that aren't like the current zeitgeist. I don't think everyone's gonna agree about what alternative hip hop truly sounds like. I think the most likely answer you're gonna get is artists like JPEG Mafia, Danny Brown, Red Veil, Brockhampton, Denzel Curry. But these artists don't really sound alike, and even though they all do kind of work together, they all have very distinct styles, at least to me. They don't even really rap on the same kind of beats. And the underground rap world has so many different vibes and pockets. But if you saw my underground video, you know that word doesn't mean the same thing to anybody. Someone could say West Side Gun is, by the definition, alternative hip hop. And somebody could say Xavier's So Based is alternative hip hop. I don't really know if either of them are wrong by the definition of like what alternative means. But I could tell you if they played a show, each in the same city, I don't think that many people would be like, I don't know which one I'm gonna go to. They have very different fan bases. And for alternative rock today, I think the best way I can put it is, what is regular rock? Like Greta Van Fleet, I guess? I don't know. I think alternative rock at this point encompasses all the different kinds of rock music. What would be the mainstream version? I'm legitimately not even sure. Maybe like Imagine Dragons, I guess. I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, there's like a shoegaze revival going on, but shoegaze was one of the original alternative rock categories. There's new wave revival, but that also is kind of like an original alternative rock category. I don't think there really is a mainstream rock that is different from the alternative rock. I think alternative rock has encompassed it and fully become the mainstream for what rock music is. So we've talked about all these different pockets of alternative, from rock to R&B to even just the way you dress to hip hop, right? Like, what does it really mean to be alternative? You see, Western society is so individualistic at heart. Of course, that's like a generalization, but just bear with me here. We all want to be different. Nobody wants to be an NPC. The only time anyone wants to be an NPC is when someone is sending them galaxy bits on TikTok. And so we are intrinsically drawn to things that are different. There's nothing wrong with this to me. We crave new perspectives, perhaps out of escapism, or in kind of a paradoxical way, we seek community by rejecting the immediate community that's around us and looking for something that might fit us a little bit more. When something new, truly new, comes around, people who are really bored and disillusioned or maybe feel like an outcast, they're going to be drawn towards it, especially when it's built around inclusion and things that someone who is like just kind of not feeling what's around them, they're going to be drawn to that. And at the end of the day, most alternative scenes start as that. Look at Tizo Touchdown. Love him or hate him, he's definitely presenting himself in a unique way, with the nails in his hair and the yellow sticky notes. It's not even really about his music, it's just the way that he presents himself is new. And he's done a great job of captivating the interest of a lot of people. When I think about the spirit of alternative today, I think about him. I think about Gene Dawson. I think about artists like that. But just as our society is individualistic, it's also capitalistic at heart. Some people actually attribute the spread of the word alternative to labels because they saw these new waves of rock music as an alternative to the older ways that were just bringing them less and less sales every year. Even then, alternative was in some ways a marketing play. A sticker you could tack onto something to help it sell. And it's no different today. The alternative tag might actually be one of the strongest marketing tactics in the book, even when it's not obviously what they're doing. Think of how many commercials or how many products are sold to you using something along the lines of like, be different or stand out from the pack. That's how they try to get to us who are socialized in the Western world. It's like the Pavlovian bell. You're like, yes, I'm different. I'm so different. I'm not like you. So let me buy that thing. So as soon as something is established as alternative or different, the machine starts churning out more things that kind of look like it, hoping that we're gonna buy that too. Like I said about the clothes, all those styles that we saw on TikTok, if they're not already in PacSun or Urban Outfitters, give it a year or two. They're churning them out right now in some factory where the people are getting less than a living wage. You can count on that. And even though he's just one album in, I'm sure labels are already trying to find the next Tizo Touchdown. Whatever that means exactly. The alternative flowchart, it pretty much goes like this. First, someone feels disillusioned and they come up with something different. And it's cool and new to a lot of people. People find that and it spreads organically. Corporations and the powers that be, they see that opportunity, they jump on it. It becomes mainstream and played out, but whatever that person did inspired somebody else to come up with their own cooler new thing, and the cycle just keeps repeating. Our focus on individualism has led a lot of people to feel kind of lonely. Patrick CC just did a whole video on this in this sense, so like, I'm not gonna go too far into that. But we have this craving for community, and many of us find that community in these alternative spaces. Whether that's in our own creative endeavors, or like going to shows and being a fan, or just maybe in like a Discord or somewhere online. But these spaces can only be alternative for so long. As long as someone sees the opportunity to make some cold hard cash off of it, it's gonna blow up. And I gotta ask, like, what does it even really mean to be alternative anymore with the internet at our fingertips? There is a much weaker monoculture than there used to be. At least in my opinion. Everyone has their own interests, and their algorithms are all just conveying that to them all the time, and they might look totally different. No longer are we picking between 30 TV channels or 15 radio stations or the 6 CDs that you can have in a car changer. The word alternative implies that there's like a clearly defined mainstream for all of us to look at and say, I want to do something different. But the thing is, we all have different mainstreams, depending on where we're from, or how we were socialized, or what we do for a living. I don't know, like there's so many different ways that we have different mainstreams. Like someone who grows up in the South, their mainstream, at least in terms of culture, even bigger than music, right? It's gonna look a lot different than me growing up in New York City, or like someone else growing up in California. And that's just within America. With the internet though, like it's not necessarily a bad thing, but these lines are all muddied. In fact, I mean, having all this access is really sick. Like you can find anything that you want on the internet, and you can get involved in any little subculture that you want. But that can also be kind of paralyzing, right? Like that's a lot of choice. Like, sometimes having too many choices is not good. That's kind of like the Patrick CC video. I'll try to stay out of going into that too much. All it means is that the way that we evaluate what is alternative might change because our mainstream just looks so different now. So there it is. I don't think Green Day ever set out when they became a band to do New Year's Rockin' Eve with Ryan Seacrest. I think if you told them that in the 90s, they would have laughed at it. When they were a little punk band in California, like, there is no way that was something that they put on their mood board. But they took that opportunity when it was presented to them, and I can't really blame them for that. Because at the end of the day, nothing can truly be alternative for that long if it gets too popular.